joining us for Building Relationships in Community-Based Research for the Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health, also known as CRCAIH. My name is Jen Prasek, and I am the Director of Community Initiatives for the Center for Health Outcomes and Prevention Research. I am also a part of the Community Engagement and Innovation Division for CRCAIH, also known as CEID. So just a little bit about myself. I am an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, and I have been with Sanford Research for just over 7 years. In fact, my work anniversary was on November 16th, so it's been 7 years and 2 days. In that time, I have had the opportunity to work with many of our tribal communities throughout South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share what I've learned along with some of my experiences to help make your application process for the Pilot Grants program as seamless as possible. This presentation is being recorded for future use. These slides will be available on our website for future reference at www.CRCAIH.org, and our website and contact information will also be shown at the end of this presentation. Also, we currently have everyone on mute, and when we get to the Q&A portion, we will unmute your lines for questions. We will hold all questions until the end, but feel free to type your questions into the text box at any time. By the end of this webinar, we will have covered the following objectives: understanding the importance of building and sustaining effective relationships, learning protocols for approaching tribal communities, and will highlight resources available for community-based researchers, particularly the pilot grant applicants. These objectives will help answer the question, if a researcher wants to do research in American Indian country, what should he or she do? I will cover a lot of generalizable knowledge, but as I said, I will share my experiences as well, which will be more specific to the tribal nations in the Great Plains, specifically South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. This is the third iteration of the pilot grants under CRCAIH, and my goal is to provide the pilot grant applicants with enough information so that even if you are not yet familiar with the process, you will have a good framework of understanding and will also know if and when to utilize the technical assistance that CRCAIH can provide. Spoiler alert, yes, you should utilize us, and you should do so right away. So first, let's begin by hitting some of the basics and giving a little bit of background. The next few slides will go over some of the tribal information, and I'll also delve just a bit into the history of American Indian research and include some examples of both negative and positive research projects. So let's start by looking at a quick snapshot of our region. Oh, and let me clarify, for the purpose of this webinar, when I use the word region, I'm referring to the states of South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. This slide shows you a couple of things. First, it shows you where all 23 tribes in this tri-state area are located. And second, it shows you that there are 23 tribes in this area. That's a lot. South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota have a wonderful representation of our indigenous or native people. So I'll provide some information about the tribes. All tribes, being sovereign nations, are unique. They have their own laws, resolutions, ordinances, and government structure. There is no one-size-fits-all. Take, for example, a tribe's governmental structure. Some are called tribal councils, while others can be called reservation business committees. And within that structure, you may have a tribal president or a tribal chairperson as their elected leader. Something else to be aware of is that there are tribes and there are reservations. These are two distinct entities. According to the United States Department of the Interior, a tribe possesses certain inherent rights of self-government and entitlement to certain benefits, services, and protections because of a special trust relationship. A reservation, however, is an area of land managed by a tribe. There are about 310 Indian reservations in the United States and over 560 recognized tribes, which means not all tribes have reservation land. I don't want to do much more than dip our toes into this topic because it can get very confusing, but I wanted to bring it up to show you how the two are different. Many tribes and reservations share the same name, such as the Lower Brule Sioux tribe on the Lower Brule Indian Reservation, but others, like the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate, reside on the Lake Traverse Reservation. A few moments ago, I did say that tribes were sovereign, so let's see if I can explain what tribal sovereignty is. The Bureau of Indian Affairs recognizes that tribal sovereignty is the inherent authority of indigenous tribes to govern themselves within the borders of the United States of America. They are domestic, dependent nations. Tribal sovereignty protects against encroachment by states. So to simplify, it means that any decisions about the tribes with regard to their property and/or citizens are made with their participation and their consent. Next, let's look at some reasons that research has a negative connotation. I'll review some of the more well-known examples of mistreatment and how that has led to a mistrust of research. First, the involuntary surgical sterilization of Native women. While this wasn't a research project, it is often cited as a blatant disregard for the rights of American Indians. An investigation by the Government Accounting Office examined 4 of 12 IHS areas and found that over 3,400 involuntary sterilizations were conducted. In many cases, they were sterilized during other surgeries like appendectomies without their knowledge or consent. And in addition, many sterilizations were conducted on young teens, again without the parents' knowledge or consent. Next, the barrel alcohol study was a situation where Native leaders and city officials who were worried about drinking and associated violence and accidental deaths in their community invited a group of sociology researchers to help assess the problem and work with them to devise solutions. At the conclusion of the study, researchers formulated a report entitled Inupiat Economics and Alcohol on the Alaskan North Slope, which was released simultaneously as a press release and to the Barrow community. The press release was picked up by the New York Times, and they ran a front-page story entitled Alcohol Plagues Eskimos. Many of the quotes in the article made the community feel that they had been labeled a problem, and they felt stigmatized. In addition to that, many of the people in Barrow and Alaska's Native community as a whole felt that researchers had violated their trust by failing to share all the results with them first and by not allowing them the opportunity to comment on the results. The lawsuit brought against Arizona State University is most likely the most well-known and end result of negative research. The original project, called the Diabetes Project with the Havasupai, was intended to look for links between genes and diabetes risk. To achieve this, blood samples were collected and tested for a genetic association to search for links. But after several years of trying, the researchers were not successful in finding a genetic link to type 2 diabetes. So they then used the blood samples containing DNA for other unrelated studies on topics such as schizophrenia, migration, and inbreeding, all of which are taboo topics for the Havasupai. In 2003, a member of the Havasupai tribe who participated in the Diabetes Project attended a lecture at Arizona State University where she learned that the samples were used for later studies, both without her consent or the consent of other tribal members. That lawsuit was filed in 2004 and it was settled in April of 2010. Again, these are some examples with negative connotations, and while it is extremely important to acknowledge these incidents and the challenges that we've had in the past, the goal of the Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health and Sanford Research is to move beyond this history, and the one way to do so is to also recognize the good research that's been done and that is still going on today. The following examples that I have listed here all have a connection to and participation from this region. The first one is the Strong Heart Study, and that started in the early 1980s, and that started because the Secretary of Health and Human Services Task Force concluded that information on cardiovascular disease in American Indians was inadequate, and they strongly recommended epidemiologic studies of the problem. The Strong Heart Study was designed, and its goal was to examine the prevalence of cardiovascular disease and its risk factors in American Indians. There was participation from communities from 13 American Indian tribes in 4 states, including Oklahoma, Arizona, South Dakota, and North Dakota. It is the largest epidemiologic study of American Indians, and it continues today with ancillary studies that include families of the original participants. The next one is the Regional Native American Community Network Program Center, Native People for Cancer Control. It's a big name for a big project because this program is comprehensive. It provides cancer prevention, outreach, and health promotion activities, on-site and remote delivery of education for cancer and digital storytelling workshops, community-level research on colorectal cancer screening, health communication, and cancer risk factors, and research training opportunities for American Indian and Alaska Native investigators and students. They work with partner tribes, villages, and tribal organizations in 8 states: Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And their goal is to address the challenges of cancer-related education and research. Next is the Safe Passage Study, and that is a prospective study that investigates the role of prenatal alcohol exposure in stillbirth and sudden infant death syndrome. In total, over 12,000 women and infant pairs from South Africa and the Northern Plains will be enrolled in this study. The Northern Plains cohort collaborates with 2 American Indian tribal communities and 2 urban locations. And the last one on the list is the Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Epidemiological Research Study, or PHASER. PHASER is an active case ascertainment school-based prevalence study where all first graders were evaluated for potential FASD, and one site included all public and private schools in a large urban Midwest community. Data collected included growth parameters, dysmorphology evaluation, some psychological testing, and maternal interviews. And a recent article published in Pediatrics showed 2 interesting points that I wanted to share. One is that socioeconomic status was not identified as a maternal risk factor for having a child with FASD, and that there were no significant differences in race or ethnicity between those identified with FASD. This information helps to dispel myths that FASD affects only certain races, such as American Indians, or that it affects only certain income levels, particularly lower income levels. So, equipped with a little bit of background, let's move on to understanding the importance of building and sustaining effective relationships. In the course of my work, there have been many occasions when I've been asked for a fix-all. I've also been asked for a step-by-step process for working with American Indian tribes. So first of all, let me clarify that this webinar is intended to provide you with an overview of how to work with tribal communities and to also show how the Community Engagement and Innovation Division and CRCAIH can assist you in this process. But as you will see, each of your future community partners are unique, so we can give you a foundation, but it's up to you to build the rest. First, investment is important, so think about your research. Think of all the things that you learn, do, how many articles you read, how many people you brainstorm with, just to make sure that your research is innovative, sound, and a good match, especially a good match for the funding announcement. This takes time and it takes patience. The same goes for working with a community, and that means any community. You need to invest some time and energy into it. Permission covers a lot of things. It covers approval from the tribe to conduct the research through whatever approval mechanism they have, which we'll cover in just a moment. And it could also mean getting permission to present to the appropriate board or committee to get approval to include them in your proposal, or for them to show you support in the form of a tribal resolution or a letter of support. Acceptance and assistance, basically you want the community to be accepting of your research. This typically entails working to engage with a few key individuals and asking for their assistance to make sure you are taking all the appropriate steps to share information about your project or proposal. Lastly, the first few steps that you've already taken should lead you to a natural collaboration. Remember, if you're looking to work with a community, you should be working with a community. A liaison is a great place to start. So when you're looking at collaboration, liaisons are great. Another suggestion is community advisory boards, which are made up of representatives across the community who can provide you feedback on your project. CABs are often used in community-based participatory research, or CBPR, as many of you are familiar with. And if you're working with communities, you should be including at least some elements of CBPR. What is CBPR? One of my favorite definitions is from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. CBPR is a collaborative approach to research that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. It begins with a research topic of importance to the community, has the aim of combining knowledge with action and achieving social change to improve health outcomes and eliminate health disparities. The term community-based participatory research can be overused, and many times people don't think it's being used correctly, and they're probably right on the technical side of that, but I would like to stress that community-based research can incorporate just simple elements of CPBR. The most important thing to remember is that you need the community's feedback and buy-in in order for your project to be successful. There is a lot of information out there on community-based participatory research, so I strongly encourage that you go out and do a little research on what it is and how and where it's been used. There's a lot of examples of successful programs out there. I will, however, mention one key question that anyone conducting community-based research should be asking themselves. And the question is how does it benefit the community that you are working with? So let's go back to the studies I mentioned before. Strong Heart, the Regional Native American Community Network Program Center, Native People for Cancer Control, Safe Passage, and PHASER. All of these programs and studies have had a strong community investment. Why? Because they are doing this, what they are doing, the work that they are doing has a strong impact and powerful impact on the community. And in many cases, the education and outreach that accompanies these studies is just as beneficial. It's repeated and it's important. So when sustaining relationships, investment in community-based research is ongoing. As with any endeavor, anyone involved wants to know that you're there for more than just what benefits you. Continuing to demonstrate you're committed to working with a community starts building a foundation of trust, which is what we all want. Collaboration and communication are two words that sum up the importance of keeping everyone involved in the decision-making, asking for feedback and actually using it, and keeping everyone updated on progress, obstacles, new ideas, and upcoming events. It's a team, and if a team member feels that they're being left out of any of these things, the team starts to break down. The liaison is also key when sustaining the relationship. A role like this in the community gives you someone on your team who is invested in the community and your project. It's the best of both worlds. So think about how you can best utilize a liaison to help improve your communication, to help improve your trust, and to reflect your investment in the community. Again, we're talking about community-based research, so think bi-directionally. There are many opportunities here for you to contribute to the development of a community's research infrastructure. Once a project gets underway, a liaison or other community staff person can help with conducting interviews or coding, but you as a researcher can provide the expertise and training to further develop their knowledge and experience base. Then once your project is over, they have skills that can transfer to other projects. The next part I'm going to share with you is based off of some of my experiences. You may work with someone or have had community projects that did not utilize some of these topics, but again, I'm using what has worked for me to help get projects underway. So we'll talk now about learning protocols for approaching tribal communities. Protocols are basically the do's and the don'ts. Today I'm not going to touch much on don'ts because in my opinion, covering what you should do is much more constructive. First, I suggest you learn as much as you can about the tribe. Do they have a research review board? If not, what is their approval process? Almost every tribe has a website. Start there. Or give me a call and I'll gladly share what information and resources I have. Second is the introduction. If a researcher has never worked with a community in the past, and if I have a relationship established, I will reach out and make an introduction. I typically send out an email with a promise to follow up with a phone call. The email gives them some background and context, and the phone call not only gives me an opportunity to connect, it's an opportunity for the conversation to flow naturally. It's much more natural than email. If a community is interested, they may invite you, most of the time informally, to present information to an approving board or to their approving committee. One example that I can share is a couple of years ago when we were working with a community here in South Dakota. I was the one who was responsible for making the initial contact with the tribe, and they invited us to come up to the community and present information. And at the close of the meeting, they invited us to come back up to do another presentation. And when we got into the car, the people who had done the presentation did not recognize the informal invitation. So again, kind of recognizing that it's not going to be an email, it's not going to be a letter, it could simply be talking about next steps. That can be an invitation as well. In some cases, you may actually already be already speaking with the person who has the authority to provide you with a letter of support. But remember, community-based, so you want to make sure you take advantage of every opportunity where you can share your information. And don't be afraid to ask for assistance. If you don't know what the next step is, or if you aren't sure who you're supposed to be working with, ask. If you want feedback, ask. If you forget the date of when their research review board meets, ask. I think sometimes people who are in a new situation don't ask questions or ask for help because they're afraid that they should already know the answer. And speaking on behalf of myself, I can honestly say that I try not to assume someone already knows something or someone. And I think that's important. If things go as you hope, eventually you will know these things or that person. But look at it this way. If you're from New York City, that's your community. New Jersey is not your community. Just because you know where it is and people who live there, that does not make you an expert. So how can the Community Engagement and Innovation Division, also known as CEID, assist you? Well, it all begins for me with sharing what I know and who I know. So mi casa is su casa. The purpose that I have in my job is to help you succeed. So I will share everything I have to help you succeed where you can and to help you do what you do. I can help by making introductions. As I stated before, we usually provide an email and a follow-up and then we follow up with a phone call. I want to step back for just a moment here. You may already know someone who is from or who works with a tribal community that you would like to work with, and they may have offered or you may have asked them for their help, and by all means, utilize them. Absolutely. CRCAIH is not the only way to do this. I'm simply showing you how we can help you. But one thing to keep in mind is the importance of the protocol that we just went over. There are steps that every tribe has, formal or informal, and you want to make sure that you recognize that. If the tribe has a process for approving or reviewing and approving research studies, follow it. Whether you are a researcher in the community, or a researcher coming into the community, respect the process because it can only help you in the long run. Okay, so stepping back in, we can also help with facilitating meetings or figuring out next steps, and that's actually a very common activity for us. We've set up meetings, we've reviewed presentations, and we've helped clear up some murky communications. And we can also provide you feedback on your protocol. We've brainstormed with applicants, we've done some problem solving, and we've offered additional ideas. We've helped set expectations, and we'll help you set expectations, and this webinar is a good first step. What should you expect during this process, and just as importantly, what should your community partners expect? So we also have some expectations of the researchers. So what do we expect? We have some pretty high expectations of you, and your own expectations are probably just as high. So let me expand a little bit on time. As with any RFA, time is a deciding factor, and there are approval processes that will need to be considered when you consider applying for an RFA. So, for example, I had a community that I worked with that I work with regularly that has the following approval process. The researcher or project staff presents to their Human Services Board, and if there's changes that are requested, obviously they come back to the Human Services Board when those changes have been made, and they will meet with them until that approval has been achieved. Upon that approval, the Human Services Board, with the study personnel present, will present to the Tribal Council. And once that approval has been received, then the Great Plains Area Institutional Review Board will approve or will review your application. Just as an FYI to anybody who is not aware of this, the Great Plains Area Institutional Review Board is the IRB for all the nations within South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, and I think that's it. But every area has its own institutional review board, and that is, they cover the expanse of that region. And then that's also, just to keep in mind, that's in addition to any other institutional approvals that are required by my organization. So I work for Sanford, I also have to go through this IRB. Ask yourself how your project will benefit the tribe, and be honest. So the question is will your research have direct benefit on the tribe? And if the answer is no, that's okay, but you can also explain to them how it will contribute. How will your work contribute to this health condition for this population at large? But also think that if there is no direct benefit for the tribe, is there something that you can offer? Again, going back to community-based, bi-directional communication, bi-directional relationship, are there things that you can offer? Can you offer education? Can you offer information? Can you offer outreach? Things like that. The other question is, how will it benefit you? How are you going to benefit as a researcher doing this research with this community? And then the other question that you have to be ready to answer is to talk about the funding and the sustainability. When you're talking about funding, that's on multiple levels. It can be talking about the funding source, the funding, how long the funding is, the funding period. There are some tribes here in South Dakota that require you to share their budget. So if you want their support, you have to share that not only the information about the funding itself or the funding source, but detailed information about the budget to see how much of that budget is going into the community to sustain the project or to run the project. And then also you need to answer questions about sustainability. Is the pilot grant program, for example, is a one-year program, but what happens next? What are next steps? What are some things that you can see the pilot grant program or pilot grant that you're applying for act as a springboard for? So your answers are important, and knowing your answers, or at least somewhat having a good framework of your answers, is important, because the communities are going to ask you these same questions, and they have every right to. And in addition to that, you have every obligation to answer. So again, transparency, being fully transparent with these communities is extremely important. Remember, because you and the community want to make sure that the project that you are proposing is a good fit. And not, once it is a good fit, you need to prove to you and to them that it is. So while sustaining relationships, and actually while building relationships, you can also encounter some challenges. And some of the challenges I'm going to talk about here are time, response or lack of response, the approval process, and fit. So when thinking about time, some questions you have to keep in the back of your mind at all times is, do you have enough time to get required approvals from the community? And is your project realistically a good fit for the project period? So trying not to fit a 3-year program into a 1-year pilot grant is a good first step. But also keeping in mind that if you haven't reached out to the community yet, you need to start thinking about, like, in the immediate future, reaching out to us or reaching out to that community if you already have a contact, so that you can get those steps in place and get that underway. Another challenge is response time, or even sometimes lack of response, and this goes both ways. So one example I have is actually a researcher-based lack of response. I had made an introduction via email between a researcher and a community, and the researcher said that she wanted to follow up via phone, which my community contact was perfectly happy with. She didn't do so until a little over 2 weeks later, and that means that what happened then was that she missed the opportunity to present at the next committee meeting, and so she did not have time to get that tribe's approval before her RFA application deadline. But other times we may reach out and not receive a timely response, and we may need to find another community connection, and we can do that, and we have done that. So like I said, it does go both ways. Sometimes the response may not receive an immediate, sometimes a request may not receive an immediate response because who we reached out to may be awaiting internal approvals or a response from someone else. And sometimes we may just need to be patient, but it's kind of a fine line of figuring out, should we wait a little bit longer or reach out or just touch base? So it's sometimes just kind of a little bit of a test game there. For the approval process, that's always a challenge, I think, for anybody, just because time is always an element. But you need to learn the process. You need to keep in mind those deadlines. We are all slaves to deadlines, and this is no exception. There have been times when a meeting date doesn't work with submission timelines, and sometimes we can develop a workaround, but sometimes we can't. It just depends. And the last one I want to touch on is fit. Sometimes your project may not be a fit for a particular community. And in that case, we may look for another community who's interested, and that's always an option. Keep that in mind. Just because one community is not interested, or they may not have the time or the resources to work with you, doesn't mean another community can't. The other side of a project and its fit is whether or not the project is a good fit for any community. So thinking if you're pursuing an RFA and you're simply adding a community component to qualify for the RFA, believe me, I will tell you if it's not a good fit. So some of the requests that we've received from past pilot grant applicants are listed here. We've been asked to make introductions, and in some cases we've had to reintroduce people. Emails getting lost, phone messages getting lost. We've been asked to review the premise of a study and the applicability to American Indians. So we've actually had brainstorming sessions where someone will sit down and say, here's my idea, this is what I've noticed in some of the literature, do you think this would fit? So a lot of times a lot of our applicants will already think it's a fit for American Indians, but they're looking for a community in which it would fit best with. We've been asked to give project feedback, and that goes all the way from the reality of the budget for travel to actually reading in the entire project pros and giving feedback on how it all looks. We've been asked to explain the project to a community or an organization. So we've actually been asked to do so, and I will say right now that while I appreciate people asking and relying on us for that expertise, I will always kick that back to the researcher that it is up to them to explain the project to the community and the organization. It is your research project. You have the best understanding of it, and this is a perfect opportunity for you to start establishing that relationship. With that being said, we will be there by your side for those steps, so we can help walk you through that. But we are not going to do those steps for you. And we've also been we've been asked to provide letters of support, which we do quite frequently for multiple projects, not just within the pilot grants. And so we'll actually work with the community to get a letter of support, to secure a letter of support. But in many cases, a lot of times the researcher is responsible for providing a template or an example of letter of support so that information about the research project and how they visualize it affecting the community or working with the community is there. And then we allow time for the community to provide their edits to that and make it their own letter. And we have actually been asked to help write the grant. And there are components that we can actually add our expertise into, but I will say again, this is your research project, this is your funding, so you are responsible for writing the grant. Okay, so let's move on to Objective 3, which is highlighting some of the resources available to community-based researchers, particularly the pilot grant applicants. So some of the resources that I'm going to kind of talk about here are just doing some research on your own, trying to find out information that you can. I'm going to highlight some successful programs that can provide you assistance. I'm also going to highlight a couple of handbooks, and then I'm going to talk about some webinars quick. So when I talk about research, I'm talking about you doing your own research, going out onto the World Wide Web, Google, Bing, whatever you use, and doing some keyword searching and learning about some of these keywords and phrases. If you've never done community-based participatory research before, you have to learn about it. It's very much an experiential process as well, but having some background is very important. So I provided some keywords here: community-based participatory research, history of research, examples. I've typed all of these in myself just the other day, and they all come up with pages and pages of information. Some of them come up with examples that are videos on YouTube that talk about projects that use these keywords. But going all the way down to community advisory boards, tribal research, research review boards, and then even looking at evidence-based research or interventions. And you'll have a lot of words too that once you start typing some of these in, you'll see other keywords that pop up. Some other things that you can research with is getting more specific, is you can actually start doing your own research on some of the tribal partners you may want to work with. So for example, in our region, the tribes that we work with here at CRCAIH are the ones that I listed. So we work with Fond du Lac, which is in Minnesota. We work with Oglala Sioux tribe here in South Dakota. We work with Spirit Lake Nation, and we work with Turtle Mountain out of North Dakota, and I apologize, I'm missing one. We also work with the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate here in South Dakota as well. You can also type in Minnesota, South Dakota, or North Dakota tribal resources, and usually you'll pull up a lot of the information that's out there. A lot of these places, South Dakota and Minnesota and North Dakota, all have South Dakota or state tribal resources pages. And there's a lot of information out there as well to help you learn about the partners that you want to work with. And last but not least, there are tribal websites. So type in the name of the tribe and go to their website. Perfect example is, I may have neglected them on the list, but I highlight them in my PowerPoint. The Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate have a wonderful website, and this is a picture of their page, of their research office. So you can actually go in there and learn about what they have set up for their research process, where they're at, and then there's actually contact information not only, and unfortunately it's not on this page, but it's on the left side, there's contact information, but if you scroll down in the real web page, is the contact information for their research liaison. Next, we'll talk about some success programs that you can utilize as resources. One of them is the Partnerships for Native Health, and that's at the University of Washington. The next is the National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center. And last but not least, the third is the Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health. So first, let's talk about the Partnerships for Native Health. Like I said, they're out of the University of Washington, but they work with, but they also conduct community-centered research. They offer training, they offer education, and they offer outreach. And their website is right there. So it's www.p4nh.org. And here is a glance at their page. So the Partnerships for Native Health, you can actually go in there. If you look at the top menu bar, they have a news, research, news tab, research tab, training tab, education, outreach, and every one of those has a huge array of information for you. The next one is the National Congress for American Indians Policy Research Center. It was launched in 2004, and it is a broad and comprehensive research and policy analysis consortium, and they are focused solely on issues facing tribal communities. And they contain information, they have a lot of information and resources for tribes, policymakers, and researchers, and there is their website. Here is an example of their website, or this is their website page, their most recent one. And you'll notice at the top, again, there's a menu bar. They've got information that's broken down by tribe, policymaker, researchers, media, and donors. So it'd be breaking it down even further than what I just mentioned. And like I said, last but not least, Collaborative Research Center for American Indian Health. We were formed in September of 2012 with a grant from the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities. And our goal is to help communities and health professionals plan and perform research addressing the health issues of American Indians in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. And our website is www.crcaiih.org. So here is a couple of other items that I wanted to share, and this is for some handbooks that are offered out there. So this is just the front page of each one. The first one is the Walk Softly and Listen Carefully. and that is building research relationships with tribal communities. And the second one is the community engaged research. And it's a quick start guide for researchers. The Walk Softly and Listen Carefully is actually offered through the NCAI PRC, so the National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center. And the second one is actually more general. It's not designed exclusively towards American Indians, but it's very good when talking about community engaged research. Okay, so the last thing is webinars for pilot grant applicants. So I don't know if for those of you who had signed in at the very beginning, I kind of showed these. These are available on the CRCAIH website, and if you go to our training and resources page, you can find these. These are exactly the titles that you would need to type into our search engine if you wanted to look at these. So these were ones that we provided last year, and they're a great resource for pilot grant applicants. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much for attending, and I will actually start taking any questions if anyone has any. Thank you.